so fortunate to have two very special guest speakers tonight from the Montgomery County Women's Center. With us for our Parent You this evening, we have Linda Quiros, who is the Outreach Manager, and Lady Lopez, who is the Outreach Coordinator from the Montgomery County Women's Center. The center is a nonprofit organization that offers free assistance to anyone who has been a victim of domestic violence or sexual assault. Linda and Lady shared so much great information with our Humble ISD counseling department earlier this week, and we're so thankful that they're back with us again tonight to share that information with you. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Linda and Lady.
Point, I tried to center it around more for parents, how as a parent, you can talk to your teen, how as a parent you can look for red flags of how abuse may look like, and some things that some tips on how you can start the conversation, and maybe some things that you can even start doing at home to begin the conversation. So like I said, my name is Linda and I work with the Montgomery County Women's Center. I have been here for about 5 years. What we do, Lady and I, is we go out into the community and we teach healthy relationships. We go to middle schools, high schools, and we go to colleges. And once in a while, we'll do special training presentations for professional places. So for example, we'll go to doctor's offices. We will go to, for example, last year we presented at a bank. We recently went and did a training with the Humble ISD counselors on Monday. So we do a little bit of everything just to kind of raise awareness and talk about healthy relationships. So at Montgomery County Women's Center, our mission is to lead the effort in preventing domestic violence and sexual assault through crisis intervention, assistance, advocacy, empowerment, and social change. We have a variety of programs here in Montgomery County Women's Center. We have 2 offices, one in Conroe and one in the Woodlands. All the services that we provide are completely free. So we offer emergency shelter and we offer hotline services. Those are ran 24/7. So if you were to call and you need help and you need assistance, you will always have somebody answer the phone. You will never get somebody saying, press 1 for this. It will always actually be an actual human letting you know that they are there and how they can help you. We do offer counseling and support groups. The counseling and support groups are free as well. And we start counseling as young as, I want to say, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And we can start even with play therapy, and we offer family therapy. We also have an advocacy team. Our advocacy team responds to the hospitals, and they are on call 24/7. They respond when someone has been recently sexually assaulted or somebody had to go to the hospital and seek services because of a severe abuse. And we kind of help them along the way. We stay there during the police interview. We advocate for them in the matters of police, in the matters of courts, in the matter of getting help with them at the hospitals, and even accompaniment to the hospitals. We also have a legal team. Our legal team consists of 3 staffed attorneys, and we represent cases of, child support. We represent cases of divorce and custody. And then we also have a transitional housing. Our transitional housing, right now we house about 17 families, and this program is mainly meant for victims who are now out of immediate danger. So they have been out of the abuse for a while and are currently working. They are working either towards going to school, but they are still receiving services from us. And then lastly, but not least, it's our education and community outreach, which is myself and Lady. And so what we do is we go out into the community and we talk about everything domestic violence and sexual assault, healthy relationships, and how to spot the red flags. Okay, so we're going to start by defining teen dating violence. If at any point any of you have any questions, please put it in the chat. I think somebody was going to be able to handle that on the other side. If you guys are confused about something, please, this is for you to learn. And my contact info will be at the end so that you are able to ask me any questions that you could today. So let's define teen dating violence. Teen dating violence is a pattern of abusive behavior that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. I want you guys to remember power and control, because many times when we think of dating abuse or dating violence or domestic violence, we think physical. There's some type of physical abuse going on, but it doesn't necessarily have to only be physical. Abuse is when one partner has more power and control than the other. Okay, and it usually looks like a pattern. So usually we'll see the physical, we will see the emotional, we will see the psychological, sometimes even the sexual abuse, and that is just to gain and maintain that power and control over another. Okay, Some statistics that we see is that violent behavior typically begins between the ages of 12 and 18. Girls and young women between the ages of 16 and 24 experience the highest rate of intimate partner violence, almost triple the national average. 1 in 3, this statistic I always talk about because many times when we think about dating violence, a lot of people don't talk about it or think it's not as common. But when we look at the statistic means that 1 in 3 students will be in an abusive relationship before they graduate high school. So that is a big number, 1 in 3. The severity of intimate partner violence is often greater in cases where the pattern of abuse was established in adolescence. So what we usually see sometimes is that if there was children who grew up watching family violence, who grew up in domestic violence, who even grew up abused as a child, almost always we see it greater in their cases because it was established very young in age. Though 82% of parents feel confident that they could recognize the signs of their child was experiencing dating abuse, a majority of parents, 58%, could not correctly identify all the warning signs of abuse. And I think that's why it's important to have, webinars like this or attend any trainings that you can on this, just because any little information helps. And even if it's not happening in your home, you can definitely help somebody out by giving them some sort of advice, some sort of help, or even letting them know, hey, this is more common than you think. This is how you can help. Okay, teen dating violence in schools. Victims report higher rates of victimization and violence occur while on school campus. 43% report teen dating violence in a school building or on school grounds. A lot of the times when we've gone to schools and presented, many students has let us know that either it was like an after school event, a football game, or it was right before school. It could be on the bus, at the bus stop, almost anything where they see each other within school grounds. Only 33% of teens who were in a violent relationship ever told anyone about the abuse. Okay, so now let's look at some dating violence forms of abuse. I like to cover this because many times, like I said, we assume, if somebody says, I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship, or I know I'm being abused, we automatically think physical. And physical, of course, is the most common. That's the most common that we will mostly see. But it's important to not forget the other ones because the other ones are much more common than physical. So let's talk about physical abuse. Physical abuse can be any type of hitting, slapping, choking, kicking, shoving, biting, force feeding, assaulting. Many times when we think physical, we think, if they're walking around with a black eye, a broken bone, a bruise. 9 times out of 10, when there is physical abuse, a lot of times we won't see the abuse. Many times it will be hidden, or many times there will be no marks or bruises. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not severe. It just means that physically they are not being very hard with the physical abuse, but it is still under physical abuse. It could be as simple as grabbing you by the arm and pulling you, simple as grabbing you by the face and making you look at them, right? Now let's talk about emotional and verbal abuse. This one is it's a difficult one because we think, if somebody talked to me a certain way, I would not let them, emotional abuse. To me, it's one of the worst ones because when somebody leaves a relationship and there's, let's say, for example, physical violence, you leave a relationship and the physical abuse stops, right? But when you leave a relationship that's emotionally and verbally abusive, this person, when you were in that relationship, they were putting you down, they were embarrassing you in public, they were threatening you in any way, telling you what to do, telling you what to wear, who to hang out with, kind of controlling everything that you do and what you do. And so when you get out of this relationship and there was this kind of abuse, many times you are still thinking about the way that this person talked to you, right? So usually we see somebody who their self-esteem was very, very high when they started the relationship, but then when they left, their self-esteem is so low that now they need kind of reassurance for everything. Many times they think about themselves the way this person did. So if anytime they want to make a decision, they think, I wasn't good enough, I'm not good enough, or I don't think I'm strong enough to do this, because they were so emotionally and psychologically abused that they start thinking that same way. And unfortunately, it happens more often than so. And that's why I think that this is probably one of the worst ones, because even though you're out of the relationship, now you have to work on yourself, and you have to start from square one and not start thinking differently about how you used to think about yourself. Let's look at financial abuse. Financial abuse, we usually see it more often we do see it in teen dating violence, but it's more often seen in, for example, like married couples or people that are already living together. So with financial abuse, it could be, taking your paychecks, not paying bills, preventing you from working, controlling where and how you work. The way I see it in teen dating violence, for example, I've had some teens in schools who had told me, I have a job, but when I go to work, my boyfriend, my girlfriend say I'm lying and I'm not going to work, and I'm cheating, or I'm out with my friends, right? And so they said that sometimes they would be at work and their dating partner would show up at work, and they would just kind of be waiting out there in the parking lot just to see if they really were there, or they would show up and go inside depending where they were working, and just to kind of make sure that they were there. Sometimes they would even call where they were working just to check in that that person was there. So these are stories from teens that I have heard. And I know that it doesn't really mean financial, but it gets to the point to where if they're constantly harassing them at work and they end up being fired, that in itself falls under, form of control and abuse, and definitely can be financial. Okay.
And Linda, can I chime in on this one real quick?
Absolutely.
So I feel like this is probably the first time that we start seeing signs of stalking as well. Because if they go to school together, then they can see each other at school and it's normal. But once they start going over to their workplace, I think this is when we start seeing signs of actual stalking happening, because it's not a place where they would normally be together. So that's definitely a red flag to look out for. If your child starts telling you that their partner is always showing up at their work and that they're making a scene and things like that, that's definitely a red flag to look out for.
Absolutely. Thank you, lady. Yes, definitely this can lead to stalking. A lot of the times people think, stalking only happens when, somebody that really is interested in you and you've turned them down, but not necessarily. It is somebody that you can be dating and you don't even know it's happening. Sometimes we've gotten teens who have told us, I didn't even tell my boyfriend or my girlfriend where I was at. They already knew. And a lot of times that's because they had been following them, or many times they share locations with each other. So that leads me to digital abuse. And this one is, I don't want to say fairly new, because it's not more fairly new, but it has been more seen now, especially because now we see teens who, can't live without their phones, cannot live with social media. All they do is text all day, Snapchat, send pictures, everything and anything. And it's an extension of themselves. And so, it's easier to accept it, but as we accept it, we have to teach them to be safe, right? Because when we use phones, when we use social media, a lot of times people think, I sent something, but I deleted it and it's gone forever. I took a picture of something, but you know what? It's gone forever. And we need to teach them that it's not, right? Things that you send, things that you take, things that you do, especially on your phones via text, social media, email, whatever, it can be pulled back up. And that's something that I guess a lot of the teens don't grasp. And we think, oh, it's fine. I sent it. It's gone. Especially when we talk about Snapchat, because Snapchat is very popular. We have to be very careful with that. Now, the way we see digital abuse, it can be, somebody sending threats via text, social media, email, stalking or humiliating you on social media, logging into your social media or email accounts without your permission. And we do see that a lot, especially when couples share their passwords or they share each other's, like, for example, Facebook's or Instagram. And even like forcing you to share passwords. A lot of the times, especially now that we've gone back into the schools, many students don't see a problem with it. They think, if I have nothing to hide, then I think it's okay for my partner to have my password. And that should not be the mentality at all, and I try to teach teens, how do you think this relationship will go from here if that's the mentality? And a lot of them, stay quiet and think, well, I mean, I have nothing to hide. I'm not cheating. I'm not doing anything. I'm like, exactly. But what is the main thing that we talk about that a relationship that is healthy should be built off of. And we'd say trust, right? And yeah, you can say you have nothing to hide, but then where does the trust start forming, right? And so I bring that up all the time with teens. If they feel that the relationship is stronger because they look through each other's phones and nothing is happening, how does that solidify that relationship, and how does that relationship grow? And it kind of makes them think a little bit about it, because it shouldn't be that way, right? I mean, unless it's something that they're both agreed to and it doesn't become unhealthy or abusive, then, you know, by all means, share your passwords. But if it becomes something to where, you know, you can't even respect each other's boundaries, and let's say, for example, you don't want to share your password, you don't want to share your social media, you don't want to give them your phone, then that partner should be okay with it, right? They shouldn't have to reprimand you for it. They shouldn't have to get mad at you. They shouldn't have to verbally abuse you or even accuse you of cheating, right? It should be understood, because even though and I always tell teens, even though you're dating, you are entitled to your boundaries. Boundaries are very, very important, because you are dating, that person does not own you, that person, you are not their property, it does not tie you to anything, right? And I tell them all the time, setting boundaries with your significant other is very important, because then you know where you both start and where you both end, right? Last but not least, sexual abuse. This one, I want to say it's harder to talk about it with teens. I think because many of the teens that I have worked with these couple of years, you know, they assume, if I've done something already with that person, then I can't, it's like I can't take it back, right? And so it's important to talk to them about what consent is, and when consent can be given and at what age, right? And so the age of consent in Texas is 17, and I remind them that all the time, especially because, with dating, there comes some thoughts of things are expected to happen. And I always tell, teens, that's not how it should be. When we talk about sexual abuse, it can be, pressuring or forcing you to do anything sexual without your consent, like forcing you to have sex or perform sexual acts that you are not comfortable with. It can even be restricting access to birth control, forcing you to watch pornography or participate in pornographic videos, and even sexting. And I even tell students about even the dangers of sending, naked pictures, right? Many times we think, it's not a big deal. I'm going to send it through Snapchat. It's going to get deleted anyways, because I only sent it for a period of time. And I always tell students, you get in trouble for that, and the person who received it. And if the person that received it shows it to somebody or sends it to somebody else, screenshots it, whatever, they get in trouble for that as well. So being very, very careful about what to send. And I always reiterate, if a person say they love you, say they like you, say they want to be with you, nothing in this world will change if you say no to this, right? If something in that relationship changes because you said no to doing any of these things, then that should automatically be a red flag. Right? Because in a relationship, it should be a mutual understanding, right? If I'm not okay with this, then you should respect that, right? But if you're not okay with this and the partner is constantly pushing them into getting a yes out of them, that should be a red flag for them. And this is something that I talk to teens about all the time. You are entitled to your no, right? If you say no, don't feel bad. Don't feel like you have to say yes or you have to change your mind because this person is pushing you. And I always say, even if you have done something with this person, you are still entitled to that no, right? And let's say you did say yes. You're entitled to say no, because consent can be taken back. And that's so important to teach, because we think that, I didn't say anything, I stayed quiet, or, I did say yes at first and then I didn't want to. Consent can always be taken away. And that's important to remember and to teach them, because they have the sense of guilt of, well, I already said yes, or, I had already done this before, but today I don't want to. It's important to teach that consent can be taken away, and they should not be feeling guilty for that.
And this goes for both parts too, for the person trying to get the consent. We need to teach our teenagers that they really need to have consent before they go forward with anything, basically.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, lady. Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see. Okay, so this right here on my screen is what's known as the teen power and control wheel. This power and control wheel is what we see in abusive, unhealthy abusive relationships, and how an abuser has that power and control over that someone. And so I'll go through them pretty quickly. I'll probably cover some of the ones that I see the most. So for example, when we talk about anger and emotional abuse, this is a lot where they put them down, they make them feel bad, name calling, making them feel like they're crazy, playing mind games, humiliating them, making them feel guilty. That falls under the emotional abuse. A lot of the times we hear in these teen dating violence relationships, we hear about intimidation. So, you know, when we talk about intimidation, necessarily somebody doesn't have to put their hands on you. I mean, as easy as a look, it can make somebody feel afraid. And I have seen and heard teens tell me, you know, I know when my person is angry at me because I can see them from across the room, the way they look at me. And I know that by the way that they look at me, we're going to fight after this, right? Or there's going to be an argument right after this. So with intimidation, you know, making someone afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying property, using pets, and even displaying weapons. So I think a lot of the times we get the confusion of if they didn't physically touch me, then it's okay. They just punched the wall. They didn't hit me, just slammed the door. They didn't hit me. But I always remind teens that, yeah, they did not hit you, but it's what do you think it's going to escalate to, right? They didn't hit you, but they hit next to you, right? They didn't push you into the wall, but they slammed the door, right? That relationship will only escalate and it will only get worse with the physical violence, even though they didn't put their hands on you, right? And so I always like to tell them that as soon as you see the escalation, that's when it's time to talk to someone. That's when it's time to get the help. Many times we will see that there's the minimizing, the denying, and the blaming. So many times when people are in abusive relationships and they try to make light of the abuse, usually the person who is the abuser does not take it seriously. They say the abuse didn't happen. They usually shift responsibility for the behavior. So saying that they caused it, they started the argument, that's why I pushed you, right? If you would have never started this argument, I would have never pushed you. If you didn't say this, I wouldn't have had to scream at you. If you didn't do this, then I wouldn't have to question my trust against you, right? So usually they will say sorry, but in a way they will always shift the blame or minimize it or deny it. Sometimes we will see threats. The biggest one that I've heard teens tell me is their partner would tell them, you know, I'll kill myself if you ever leave me. And so, I mean, these are teens we're talking about as young as ages of 13 all the way up to 18, who I have heard them say, you know, my boyfriend, my girlfriend said that they would kill themselves if I ever left them. And so that's a barrier for them because, I mean, especially if that's the first time that they're hearing that, they really don't know what to do with that information. And that's scary. If somebody says that to me, I mean, even as an adult, if somebody says, you know, I'll kill myself if you ever leave me, that makes you think twice about one, saying anything, or two, even trying to even leave them. So a lot of the times we stay and we try to help them through that because we don't know what to do. Sometimes we will see a big one that we see, and it's also a red flag, is the isolation. So many times when there is abuse in that relationship, the person who wants to take that power and control usually like to control what another person does, who they see, who they talk to, what they read, where they go, even people that they add on social media. I mean, it's every little thing, limiting outside involvement, using jealousy to justify actions. I mean, this is all part of the isolation and the exclusion, especially the jealousy to justify actions. So many times we will hear teens say, you know, well, they did that because they were jealous, so I understood that, right? And so I always like to bring up the topic of jealousy, right? Jealousy is a normal reaction, right? It's a normal feeling that we all get, right? Now, when does jealousy become unhealthy and when does jealousy become abusive? And then that's when I start kind of bringing those points up, right? If they blame the jealousy because of the way that they acted on you, that's not okay. People need to take responsibility for that, because just because you were jealous, it's not okay for you to have punched the wall. Just because you were jealous, it's not okay that you snatched the phone out of their hand and started going through their text messages, right? Because even with that, you're crossing boundaries and you are using to justify your actions. You understand what I'm saying? So all of that falls under the isolation and the exclusion.
And a lot of the times, sorry, Linda, let me just
go ahead.
do real quick. And a lot of the times with isolation, I think that's probably one of the scariest ones because it's kind of silent. You don't really see it until you start noticing that, you know, your child hasn't been spending as much time with their friends anymore, and all they want to do is spend time with their partner. And so it can start off as you know, as sweet as, oh, I love you so much and I just want to spend all my time with you. How about you stop going to practice? How about you leave school earlier? How about like things like that? And eventually lead to a place where they have no more friends anymore because they have ditched them for their partner. And now they have no more support outside of that relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you, lady. Yes, definitely. When it gets to the point to where a partner isolates them, it's the ultimate goal, because when you have that person isolated, now they really don't have a support system. They really don't feel like they can talk to anybody about what's going on. And so then the abuse usually tends to get worse. And also with that, we see peer pressure. So threatening to expose them, you know, spreading rumors, telling lies about them to an individual or a peer group. And so a lot of the times we do see peer pressure in that. This teen power and control wheel, you can find it online. I am going to send some to some of the counselors for Humble ISD for them to have. It's a really good tool to kind of go through and give to a teen and say, you know, do any of these fall under your relationship, right? And then having them just kind of highlight or even look at it to see like, yeah, this falls under me, right? And even just creating a conversation and saying, well, how does it look like for you and what happens, right? And then we'll go more into that later on. Let's see. Okay, so some red flags that we see when somebody is in an abusive relationships, many times we will see that they have mood swings or changes in personality. Sometimes we'll see changes in eating or sleeping habits. Many times they'll have like unexplained marks or injuries, and they stop talking and spending time with friends and family. So this is when the isolation phase comes in. This is a big one, and I think a lot of people don't realize it's a really, really big one, because once that they've gotten to the point of isolated, that emotional and psychological abuse is much worse, because if they convinced you that your friends are not good enough and now they're convincing you that you don't need to be spending time with family, then the abuse for sure is definitely getting worse. They're constantly worried about making their partner angry. So a lot of the times when we see a victim and they're by themselves, they are with family or they're with friends, a lot of the times they tend to be wary about what decisions they make, because they don't want to make their partner angry. They don't want to upset them. Many times, every decision that they make, they will constantly think about their partner in the sense of, you know, I don't want to get them upset. I don't want to fight about this, so I'm going to make this other decision. So that's another red flag to look out for. And they make excuses for their behavior. Sometimes, you know, there are friends that will call out that person's behavior and say, hey, you know, the way that this person treated you was not okay. And hey, he pushed you and I saw that and I was not okay with that. And many times, you know, if the victim is making excuses for the behavior, like for example, saying, you know, well, I started the argument, so it's my fault. And you know what, he didn't even push me that hard. Like I put my hands on his shoulder first. I started the argument first. So you know what, it's fine. I'm okay. Many times they'll minimize the behavior or they'll make excuses for their partner's behavior, and that as well falls under red flags and should be another thing that we should be looking out for. Anything you want to add to that, lady?
No, I think this is pretty thorough.
Okay. And so now every relationship, but when I talk to teens, I say, you know, every relationship's, you know, is on a spectrum, right? Because we tend to think, you know, if my dating partner screams at me, then that's abusive. If my dating partner and I argue all the time, that's an abusive relationship. And I'm like, let's break it down, right? Let's look at what's unhealthy, what's healthy, what's unhealthy, and what becomes abusive, right? So when we talk about a healthy relationship means both you and your partner are communicating. And when I say communicating, I tell them you're actually talking. No person is louder than the other. No person is disrespecting the other person. You are stating facts, just the facts, right? You are stating that what is bothering you right there and then, and what you need for the other person, right? How are your needs met through that relationship, right? Communication is a big one when we talk about relationships, because when I ask teens, what's the most important thing? And they say, oh, communication is key, right? And I'm like, okay, well, what is communication? And many times they can't tell me what it is, right? People think, you know, communication is, if I got my point through first, if I said it louder than you and you stayed quiet, then that was communication and I got my point through, and so I won, right? But communication should be a healthy, equal, mutual, respectful thing, right? And then that leads me to being respectful, trusting, honest, equal, enjoying personal time away from each other. This is very important. It is not okay to just be with each other 24/7, right? And there will be relationships where that is, right? It usually is the beginning of a relationship, right? It's the honeymoon phase. You know, you really, really like each other. You want to spend all the time in the world, but it is also very healthy to spend time away from each other. And if spending time away from each other was what makes one person angry, that should be a red flag. Making mutual choices, right? No one person should have control over the other. So if they make a choice and the other person makes a different choice, they should talk about the fact, right? Not say I'm right, you're wrong, and leave it at that. And then economic and financial partners. So this is more with the financial abuse and how to talk about finances together. But this is more when they're moved in, they're married, there's kids. Now, when we talk about unhealthy relationships, you may be in an unhealthy relationship if your partner is, you know, not communicating with you. A lot of the times we see people who are in an abusive relationship, they tend to say, you know, I always have to guess what they're feeling, right? I always kind of have to tiptoe around them because I don't know how they're feeling. I don't know if what I'm going to say next is going to make them angry. So I got to watch what I say. So that's where the communication is missing. The disrespectfulness, the not trusting, the dishonesty, trying to take control when maybe the power and control is being introduced. Only spending time together and pressuring them into activities and unequal economically. So this is when it starts becoming unhealthy. So if all of these things are starting to be introduced, this is when a relationship is going from healthy to unhealthy. Now, when it becomes abusive, abuse is occurring in a relationship when one partner is communicating in a hurtful or threatening way. So this is where the verbal and the emotional abuse is coming in. The mistreatment, accusing the other of cheating when it's untrue. And this happens more often than we think. So, you know, accuse them of cheating if they didn't get to school on time, right? Accuse them of cheating if they didn't text back on time. Accuse them of cheating if they didn't answer their phone. I mean, these teens, I know, I remember I had a teenager in one of the high schools who told me that she would set an alarm. I know it's really sad. She would set an alarm to make sure that she would text him every night and let him know that she was going to bed. And every morning when she was waking up and going to school, because they attended different schools. Because if she didn't check in at the times that she was supposed to, he assumed that she was cheating. She was where she wasn't supposed to be. He would even go to through the trouble of showing up at the school. So it got very, very bad. So when the accusing starts, that's when it tends to escalate and it becomes abusive. Denying their actions are abusive. So like I said in the power and control bill, when you, let's say you make light of the abuse and you say, you know, what you're doing is not okay. Many times if they're denying their actions are abusive, that's when it starts becoming abusive in the spectrum. And controlling, you know, the controlling part is the very, very more seen, you know, controlling who you talk to, what you wear, who you text, what friend you add, all that stuff. And then isolating you isolating their partner from others. So that's another one that falls under the abusive spectrum. Okay, so then now let's look at how it should look like, right? And we're talking about all these things of how a relationship shouldn't be, but now let's talk about teen equality. So when we look at teen equality, how a relationship should look, it should be, you know, non-threatening behavior, talking and acting so that she feels safe and comfortable expressing yourself and doing things, right? And a behavior that's non-threatening, respecting each other, mutual respect, listening to them non-judgmentally, being emotionally affirming, understanding and valuing each other's opinions. Trust and support, honesty and accountability, self-confidence and personal growth, shared power, so no person has more power than the other, communication, willingness to have open and spontaneous dialogue, right? Having a balance of giving and receiving, problem solving to a mutual benefit, not for one person to gain more power, right? And negotiating and fairness, so seeking mutually satisfying resolutions to conflict, right? So accepting changes, being willing to compromise, right? So this one as well can be found online, and it's a really neat one to give to teens as well, just to kind of show them how a healthy relationship should look like. Okay, so let's look at some of the reasons why teens don't talk. Many times we get the question of why they don't talk, why they didn't say anything, if they went through this for so long. There is many reasons, and we don't tend to think about them, but some of the reasons can be, you know, they're afraid that parents will make them break up. There's one thing I can recommend. as a parent, and if your teen is going through something like this, the first response should not be to make them break up, because 9 times out of 10 it will fail. They will get back together, and then usually the teen, usually if it's your teen who is the victim, will probably lose the trust in you and not go back and talk to you about it again. So they usually tend to be afraid that parents will make them break up. They are embarrassed, they're ashamed, or they're confused. They believe having a boyfriend or girlfriend is more important than not having one. And many times they confuse jealousy with love. And I cannot stress enough how many times I've heard students, if they're not jealous, they don't love me, right? If there's no jealousy, then they're really not in this relationship. And I think that's something that needs to be taught, talked about, why jealousy is a normal feeling, but it should not be an abnormal reaction, right? It should not be a reaction that causes somebody to be abusive or controlling. They don't think anyone will believe what's going on. The abuser acts nice sometimes. So a lot of the times we hear, the abuser is somebody who's well known. They are nice to everyone, and they're not always like that. They're only like that sometimes. So making the excuses. Many times they're isolated from friends and family. So once they got them to this point, it's very hard to reach out for help. And fear, especially fear if, for example, if the dating partner has threatened their life or even threatened to kill themselves if they ever leave. And sometimes they don't believe they're in abusive relationships. Many times we'll have teens who, especially if they grew up in domestic violence or grew up watching violence in their home, they really never learned what a healthy relationship looked like. So they don't believe that it's an abusive relationship. They just believe it's a normal relationship, which is the same thing that they saw at home. So how do you talk to your child? So many times we have to approach the conversation from a supportive and non-judgmental place. And I say that by, because a lot of times as a parent, you want to, jump in from the get-go and say, why did this go on for so long? Why didn't you tell me anything? And you start just kind of pressuring them. And then when you start that constant questioning and pressuring them, it kind of shuts them down and closes them off, and then they don't want to talk about it. So I always suggest asking open-ended questions and strategic questions. So it could sound like, I noticed you haven't been hanging out with your friends much. I miss hearing you all laughing and playing music. Is everything okay? Right? So you weren't accusing, you weren't saying anything, you just something that you noticed and it's a fact, right? Listening, especially if they start talking, be a good listener. Do not interrupt, especially if they're going on and on. Listen to whatever they have to say. Even if something catches you off guard, continue listening. Accept and believe what they are telling you, because a lot of the times this is the first time that they're saying it. So accept it. And the first thing you can say is, thank you for telling me and I believe you, right? And then focus on specific behaviors, especially if you as a parent have seen these red flags or have seen the mistreatment. You can approach it in a way where you focus on the specific behaviors, not necessarily on the person. So you're seeing and how that behavior makes them feel. Like, for example, saying something like, it seems like your partner wants to know where you are a lot and is always texting and calling. How does that make you feel? Right? So kind of posing it that way rather than making an accusatory statement towards their partner, because they could feel defensive about it and they might want to protect their partner. And then let your teen be in control, support their decisions, because you could tell them all day and every day, break up with this person, they're not good enough for you, and it's going to go in one ear and out the other, right? Because if we don't let them be in control and make their own decisions, how will they ever learn, right? The only time I say intervene is if it ever gets to the point where the harassment has gone really, really bad, or the stalking has gone really, really bad, weapons have been introduced, your teen is actually walking around with bruises, marks that are very, very significant, then I would say then intervene. But if you feel like this is something that your teen can make a decision, support them along the way, but be there for them. And then as last but not least, take relationships seriously, because your teen does, right? Many times we think, they're only 15. I mean, what do they know about dating? What do they know about love? You say that, but we see these relationships and to them it's as real as it gets, right? So you have to take it as seriously as they do, because they do too. Okay, and now these are some resources that we always tend to give away, and they're really, really good resources when it comes to domestic violence, sexual assault, and teen dating violence. So the first one is loveisrespect.org, or text love is to 22522. They have really, really good information on how to set boundaries, what a good relationship looks like, how to help a student if you're a parent, if you are a mental health professional, if you are a teacher, even if you're a friend. We have joinonelove.org. They are awesome too. Breakthecycle.org. There's a national parent helpline that you can call. They are not 24/7. They're a limited line, but you can call and ask questions. And then our Montgomery County Women's Center, which is our hotline, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. And then last but not least, this is our contact information. My name is Linda Quiroz, and this is my number, my extension, and my email. And this is Lady Lopez's contact info. If you have any questions.
Thank you guys so much for coming out and sharing information with us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.